coalition. And the things we do are, I think, are typical of what we call like a municipal trade association, for lack of a better term. You know, CONSCOMs have MACC that does advocacy work for them and training work for them. The selectmen and the planning department have organizations, MMA, for example. Every board or committee has a statewide association that does training and advocacy work, and we're the ones for community preservation cities and towns and for community preservation committees. So we provide a ton of technical assistance right from the very beginning when a community says, we're interested in adopting CPA, which is what you folks did when Michelle and Susan called and said, hey, we're interested in adopting CPA. Can you help us understand the program better? We have a terrific website, which I'm going to show you in a second. You're all now on our mailing list. We have a newsletter going out next week, as a matter of fact. We don't send a ton of email. We really try to respect the fact that you're overloaded at this point. And the thing we do, I think, number 4, our advocacy work at the State House is probably the most valuable thing we do, because you folks can find ways to learn about CPA and get educated on it and maybe get someone else to answer your questions, but you're not going to go march up to the State House probably yourself and lobby on a CPA bill to get more money for the program or to stop the legislature from monkeying around with the program, and that's what we do. That is a very active part of our group. Helping communities that want to adopt it, and then training sessions and workshops and things like that. Folks always ask how we're funded, so I'd like to put that right up front in the presentation. We fund ourselves just like any other nonprofit by applying to foundations for grants and things like that. Those 6 organizations also contribute in kind to the coalition. And the biggest source of our revenue, though, comes from voluntary dues that CPA communities pay out of their administrative budget. It's completely voluntary. You folks don't even have an administrative budget, so you won't have to worry about that for quite a while. We're here to help you. You're a complimentary member of the coalition. When you do get an administrative budget, we'll ask you to consider joining. We're very pleased that about 99.99% of all the CPA communities have felt the services were valuable, but that's a decision that's up to you folks, and we do hope you'll join at the right time, but for now, you don't have to worry about that. All right, so here's our website, communitypreservation.org. Anyone been there to do some reading or prep work? Okay, terrific. It looks nice and tidy at the front, but go into that, there is a ton of information. I don't think we've ever taken anything off the website unless it was outdated in 20 years. We just continue to build this resource for communities, and it is the only resource you're going to find. I will have a prize. I should bring a prize, actually, for anyone that can find a mention of CPA anywhere on the state of Massachusetts Commonwealth's website. There is no department at the state that deals with CPA. There's no one that has CPA in the job title. They consider it to be a local program. So they don't keep track of any of the data or the statistics, except for the financial data, of course. So this is really, really it. And we take it very seriously in terms of being a great resource for you folks. That circle right there is on a tab called Technical Assistance. That's for you. That's for members of community preservation committees who want to learn more about the nitty-gritty of how to do things with CPA and what it means. And it brings up this gigantic menu of all sorts of other, literally hundreds of articles in there about every aspect of CPA, organized by category. So feel free to use that at any point. Chase Mack, our communications director, spends a ton of time making sure this website is useful and up to date for you. So starting at the high level, 20,000 foot level of CPA, and then we'll zoom right down into your program in a minute. But CPA has become a really big program. From 2001, when my town was one of the first 37 to adopt it that very first year, it's grown to 189 communities. So more than half the cities and towns in the state have CPA. We've been getting a lot more cities of late, and particularly real urban cities and gateway cities. So 65% of the population lives in a CPA community at this point. And we're very proud of the fact that, harking back to what I said before about the communities really love the program, no community that has adopted it has ever revoked the program. That's how much communities, once they get into it and give it a shot, you do have to keep it for 5 years before you can even consider revoking it, but we have never had a community revoke CPA because all of them find it useful. It can really be customized very much to what you want to do, and everyone finds a niche in terms of what they want to do. So this is definitely my favorite map of Massachusetts, the one that shows all the CPA communities. The ones in green are the towns, and the ones in orange are the cities that have CPA. The 6 that have stars are the ones that are on the ballot in November. So you folks adopted CPA on the spring election, but more communities these days try to adopt CPA on the state ballot in the fall. So let's see if I can get these right. Burlington, Westboro, Natick, Boylston, Worcester is the one right in the center of the state, and then Shelburne out in the western Mass part of the state. Those are the 6 communities that will be voting on CPA this November on the state gubernatorial ballot. So there's a number of ways you can look at CPA and kind of measure the success. You know, one is that map, how many communities have adopted CPA, but another is if you dig into the data and see what communities have done with this money. And it's an impressive story. There have been well over 14,000 projects, and these numbers are all a year out of date at this point. In the fall, they get updated by the state in their database, so we'll have a whole new set of numbers come October. And I expect the projects will probably jump to close to 16,000 projects. If you add up all the money in CPA, the local money that's been raised and the state matching funds, $2.65 billion in 20 years. So it's a really large program at this point. Over $250 million every year is available across the state to do CPA projects. So that's not an insignificant amount of money. And you can see what folks have done to it. You know, they've really spread it very evenly across all the different categories. Money-wise, all the 4 categories kind of line up pretty evenly as it shakes out. And some impressive progress in all these different areas of CPA. All right, so now let's dig into what you folks are charged with as a Community Preservation Committee, and what might be a suggested timetable moving forward, and what are your first tasks? That's kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the financial part of CPA and budgeting, and then we'll talk about what you can do with the money. Those are kind of the 3 things that we have on the agenda tonight. Your committee and what your tasks are, how the money flows, and then what you can spend the money on. Yeah, you had a question?
This PowerPoint presentation, can this be sent to us?
Absolutely, okay. Yep. As a matter of fact, well, you'll be gone, Mark, at the end, but if anyone have a zip drive with them, sometimes people keep it in their pocketbook or their, then tomorrow, not a problem, I will email it to you tomorrow morning. And I'll email it to all of you. As a matter of fact.
If you email it to us, I can put it up
on
our
great
page.
As a matter of fact, I forgot to mention, is there an example of this yet? See that little number down in the corner? Mm-hmm. You're going to see 10 of these throughout the presentation. And tomorrow morning, when I email you a copy of the presentation, I'm going to email you links for each of these 10 notes. And that's where there's more information on this particular topic on the website. So you'll have the presentation. And if you want more information, for example, this one's all about our services and how to access our services. There'll be a link in that email tomorrow morning that we'll send out to you. All right, great question. I should have mentioned that right off the top. All right, so now that you've organized and you're here and you're meeting and you have almost a committee appointed, it's time to get to work, right? So what are your responsibilities in the first year? There is no timetable for this, by the way. Every community moves at their own pace, but these are the tasks that you have to get going on now. And as long as they take for you to get set up. We have some communities that move a little slower, and that's just fine. The money is coming in to CPA already. Your town is collecting the surcharge money. You're going to get your matching money next year from the state, and that money will just sit there waiting till you guys catch up and have a program ready to be introduced and rolled out to the town. So the first thing the law says for your first year startup responsibilities are to come up with a community preservation plan. It doesn't say much more than that. It doesn't even say it has to be a written plan, although everyone does a written plan. And it gives you very few criteria for that plan. It does say that you have to assess the needs of Lakeville by meeting with all the other boards and committees in town and looking at all the other planning documents that might be in town. You're not creating this from scratch. You're not coming up with brand new priorities if priorities have already been set in that area. You're kind of gathering up all the information that's there. Then you're filling in the gaps of things the community hasn't thought about yet, and finalizing that into a CPA plan. You are not the first community to write a CPA plan. So don't start from scratch. You have limited resources. I'm sure Mark doesn't have 6 hours or 8 hours every single day to devote to your committee, to helping you, and you folks are all volunteers, right? So our website has, half a dozen or more at this point, great examples of CPA plans. Beg, borrow, and steal and copy, because there's a lot of information in there that will be applicable to you, and other folks have thought it through and written it out, and take a peek at it and grab what you like and leave the rest. So that's available on our website, and the link to it will be in number 2 or number 3 tomorrow. So you can do that. So it doesn't also get specific in the law about how you go about this. For example, I often get asked, well, how do you meet with other committees and boards? How does that work? Can be a number of different ways. You could get on the agenda of the CONSCOM, and Nancy could, facilitate that, and then you could all go to the CONSCOM meeting. You could invite the entire CONSCOM to your meeting, or Nancy, as the representative to the CONSCOM, can go back and have a half-hour discussion at one of their meetings on what kind of priorities they have, and then she brings it back to the group here. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You could have one large meeting, if you want to. So it's completely up to you as to the steps you go through to create this plan, and then what you finally put in the plan. It does say that you have to have a public hearing. That's one thing that it does say, and you have to advertise that public hearing the same way the CONSCOM advertises public hearings on permits and things like that. And so that public hearing is designed to get the public's input, right? You're going to talk to all the boards and committees and find out what the selectmen feel about the goals and priorities for CPA, but then you want to open it up to the public and have them come tell you what some of the things they're looking at. Someone might say, well, gee, we don't have any senior housing opportunities, and our population is aging. We really need to focus on some more senior housing. Or we need a Babe Ruth baseball field. We don't have a full-size Babe Ruth baseball field in town. That's what my town is working on right now at CPA. We don't have a full-size Babe Ruth field, so we have to go to other towns when our teams play. We don't have a home field, so that's something we'd like to have. So these are the kind of things that the community hopefully will bring forward to you. And then you wrap that all up into a written community preservation plan. It is not like a master plan in that it has to be accepted by the selectmen or accepted by town meeting. It's your plan. It doesn't even say you guys have to vote to accept it, although some communities do, but others just kind of pull it all together, and now it's your planning document. You don't have to send it to anyone else for final approval or a vote at town meeting or anything like that. And then as part of the same process, you're going to need to come up with a process for people to apply for funding. So you're going to need an application. You're going to need some criteria of how you're going to make your decisions on projects. You're going to need some guidelines for how the application process works. Again, our website has tremendous examples of all of these and the best ways we've found that other communities do this. So absolutely beg, borrow, and steal on this. And when you're all done and you have like a close to final draft, we're happy to take a peek at it and make comments. Chase, our communications director, is a terrific master's in English writer. If there's a typo or something that could be worded stronger in there, he's going to find it and send it back to you as a suggested edit. And then I'll review it. And if there's any mistakes in terms of the interpretation of the law or something like that, I'll point them out to you. So we're happy to proof your plan once it's done. All right, so that's the introduction to CPA. But then you have some requirements going forward of what your board or committee does. You have to continue having a public hearing every year and update your plan. So you have to, usually around the beginning of your application cycle, you're going to have a public hearing to get people's input onto what things they want you to consider for that year or for the future. And you're going to update your CPA plan. You're also in charge of looking at the account balances and the money flow and how much money is in the account and what it's being spent on, and making sure that everything's being charged to the right account. So you have no fiduciary responsibility to actually do that accounting. The town's going to do that like they do accounting for everything else. But in the same way, your finance folks send a report either weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever it is, to the DPW director on his budget and to the school department on their budget. and to the selectmen on their budget, they should be sending you the financial data as another department for the town now. In the same way those reports come out to all the other boards or committees, you should be on that schedule, and you might have to remind them of that because you're a brand new committee, right? So they're gonna have to get used to, printing out the CPA account balances on the same schedule and sending them to you folks so you can review those at your meetings. A lot of CPA committees appoint one person to be a liaison to the financial department to facilitate that. You've already done that, terrific. So you're gonna learn how to read a municipal finance budget sheet, and as Mark will attest, it is nothing like your normal checking account, which makes sense in terms of what you spend and what you have in your account. These financial reporting things from municipalities make no sense in that way. It's its own special language that the Department of Revenue makes each community do. So your job will be to take that, translate it to English, and explain it to the rest of the committee. So you'll be spending some good time with your financial folks to really get into the nitty-gritty of municipal reporting and learning how to understand. Is that an accurate explanation of the spreadsheets and how municipal reporting does sometimes?
Well, I don't know. I seem to have no problem with those. I have more problem with my checking account. So.
Right. Okay. That's good. All right. And then these last two, this is the meat of what you're here for. This is the main responsibility going forward for your committee. Once you get all this planning stuff out of the way, you're here to prepare a budget every year for the community preservation program in the town of Lakeville and present that budget to town meeting. And you're here to review projects and spending and make recommendations to town meeting. So those are your two big functions here. And we're going to talk about both of those this evening. All right, so let's delve into the money part. I always start right up front with the money part because that seems to be what everyone wants to talk about. And it is, after all, what makes the world go round, right? Money. So your CPA program is going to have 3 revenue sources going forward, and 2 big ones and 1 small one. Your local surcharge. You adopted CPA at a 1% local surcharge. So that is now being collected on the tax bills of every commercial and residential taxpayer in town. And it's going into a separate CPA account and being tracked by the town. And that's what we call your local surcharge revenue. And then every year in November, on the 15th of November, you're going to get a distribution from the CPA Trust Fund, the statewide CPA Trust Fund. And those 2 things together are going to form 99% of your revenue that you have to spend on CPA projects. The account also earns interest. It usually is not a segmented account. It's not, someone's not from the town is not going down to Raynham Savings Bank and opening up a CPA account. It's in the town's financial system, but wherever that money is sitting, the town needs to track what interest is attributable to the CPA funds and deposit that in your fund at the end of the fiscal year. And they have to report that to the Department of Revenue on a form called the CP2. And you do want to check and make sure that at the end of the fiscal year, that interest is being put into your account. We've had communities in the past where they didn't quite understand that at the town level, and the CPA program did not get credited for the interest for a couple of years. So until things get up and running and everyone really understands CPA, it's good to check on that and make sure that is happening, because that sometimes does get missed.
Question?
Yeah.
Is this pretty standard with towns, this revenue source like this, or are they all scattered?
Nope, this is how CPA works.
Okay.
Every one of the 189 communities has these 3 revenue sources.
At that 1%?
Oh, the 1% you're talking about.
I'm talking about, we're doing 1%. Some towns do more.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it's all over the road.
Okay.
So we have 70 communities, I think they're at 3%. Those communities are all from the first 10 years of CPA mostly. We haven't seen, I think we calculated there have been 2 communities adopt at 3% in the last decade. That's kind of a relic from past times. So the sweet spot now is right where you were at, 1% or 1.5%, somewhere between 1 and 1.5%. Almost everyone now adopts somewhere in there. We have some communities at 2%. We have one community, now 2. Well, actually, one community in Westboro is on the ballot at 0.5%. So we might have 2 communities at 0.5% after an election. We have one community at 1.1%. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. I've never learned what happened up in Harvard 20 years ago, but they're at 1.1%. So it is all over the road. And there's a report on our website that'll tell you exactly what that is for every community. And then you also have exemptions to your CPA surcharge, right? People actually don't pay 1% of their property tax bill. Some communities adopt the first 100,000 exemption on the property value. There's a low and moderate income exemption where people can apply for that. So there's ways to reduce that surcharge as well. Did you adopt the first 100,000 commercial and residential?
Yes.
Right. So if someone has a $300,000 house in Lakeville, the first 100,000 they're not going to pay their CPA surcharge on. So they're only going to pay 1% on the tax attributable to 200,000 of their property value. Same thing with businesses. So it's designed to help low-income homeowners and small businesses to reduce their CPA surcharge, to make it more equitable. Good question. All right, so the trust fund is the fun part of CPA, right? Where you get matching money for the state. And dare say, you know, that map is incredible, the number of communities that have adopted CPA. If there wasn't a statewide trust fund, that map would be empty. I mean, that's the exciting part of CPA, is that you get this funding from the statewide trust fund. And by and large, the money in the statewide trust fund does not come from the state's regular budget. It is not something that the legislature appropriates every year. It's not something everyone has to fight for in their local CPA communities like every other item in the state budget. It's a dedicated fee. And it was a new fee that was instituted in 2000. When Governor Cellucci signed the CPA legislation in September of 2000 rather, there was a new fee put on top of documents filed at the Registry of Deeds. So whenever someone goes to a Registry of Deeds anywhere in the Commonwealth, and they're recording a document at the registry, whether it be a deed, a mortgage discharge, a declaration of trust, an order of conditions from the CONSCOM, Nancy, has to be recorded at the registry, there's a variety of fees you pay to the state to record that document. Now there's a surcharge on those fees as of 20 years ago. And that money is what goes to the CPA trust fund. And it's a true trust fund. The money's collected at the window at the registry, goes right to the Department of Revenue, deposited in a separate account called the CPA trust fund, earns interest there, the state money interest that's paid back into the fund. And the only thing that can be done with that money is to be paid out as a match to you folks every November. The legislature can't appropriate that or steal that for something else. So it is an amazing funding source that I think any other area of state government would love to have a dedicated funding source like that. The funding source, however, is a fixed fee. It's not like a percentage or anything like that. So when CPA was passed, the fee was $20 for most documents, $10 for municipal lien certificates. After we had been around for 18 years, that had never been adjusted. So the trust fund was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because more communities were adopting CPA. So the match fell very low, and we started advocating in 2007 to get the legislature to finally adjust those fees. It took us till 2019 to get that done. Shaking loose money from the legislature is a tough task because everyone's asking for money for their program, right? But we were finally able to get the legislature to finally adjust those fees. We had lost over half of it just to inflation by 2019. So the fees are now $50 on most documents and $25 on municipal lien certificates. That still doesn't get us to like 100% match. You know, if you're generating $200,000 from CPA, you're only going to get a percentage of that back from the state. In the early years of CPA, it was 100%. You generated $200,000 locally, you got a $200,000 check from the state every November. Last year, it was 43.8%. So anytime we talk about, and you'll see in our emails, we talk about the state match, and we always talk about it in terms of percentage. It's a percentage of what you raised locally. So if you raised $200,000 locally from your surcharge, and we say the match, DOR tells us the match is going to be 43.8% this year, which it was last November, that means you're going to get a check from the state on November 15th for 43.8% of $200,000. Boston got a check of 43.8%, but their revenue is not $200,000, it's $23 million. So you can see that every community is scaled to the extent of which they fund their local program. Their match is scaled to that. On the other end, Gosnold, anyone ever heard of the town of Gosnold? Cuttyhunk, the Elizabethan Islands off Cape Cod. They generate a whopping $5,000 a year from their CPA program. They got 43.8% of $5,000. So the program scales itself to the size of communities in that way. This year's estimate for this November is about a 35% match. By the way, this is not your first match. You don't get a match your very first year. This is your first year in CPA, FY23. You'll collect your CPA surcharge for an entire year, and then next November, they'll give you your match against what you collected in FY23. Okay, so the first year of CPA in your community is the only one in which you don't get a match. You'll get it next November, and it'll be calculated on what you collected this year. So you basically get your match at the end of the fiscal year, after the fiscal year ends. So in those lean years, we started advocating to the legislature to get some additional money from the state's budget surplus. The state pretty much has a budget surplus almost every year. This year, it's bigger than any time in history. It's like $4 or $5 billion. It's huge. So we asked the legislature for $20 million out of the state budget surplus this year. That is something the legislature has to vote to give us, and the governor has to sign that. We got 10 million last year, but if we get 20 million this year, it'll take that estimate of DOR of 35%, it'll be close to last year. In fact, we did get this in the state budget. The conference committee between the House and the Senate did agree to this, and they sent it to the governor. And it was one of the sections of the budget that the governor sent back for amendments. And when he sent it back for an amendment, he wrote, I love CPA. I want them to get 20 million out of the surplus. But traditionally, when CPA has gotten money, the life sciences program in the state has also gotten money. Those two programs have gotten surplus money in 8 out of the last 10 years. So he asked the legislature to add life sciences to that. So far, they haven't acted on that amendment from the governor, and we're actively trying to get them to push that. And a matter of fact, probably tomorrow, you're all going to get an email asking for your advocacy work. We can only do so much ourselves. We often, when it comes to the point where we really need help, we send out an email saying, hey, contact your state rep, and please ask them to push this and to mention to leadership that we're looking for them to do this bill. So you'll see what we call an action alert tomorrow. You probably get these from other advocacy groups on other topics when stuff is pending at the legislature. We don't do a lot of these, but when we feel like we need a little nudge just to get over the hump, that's when we ask folks to get involved. So anyone have a relationship with who is your state representative here? I should know that, but I don't.
Norman Oral.
Oh, Norman Oral, okay. So if any of you have a relationship with him, and when you get this action alert, feel like giving him a call or shooting him an email,
We can try.
you can try. It's all we can ask, right? Some legislators are going to be more active on it than others, depending upon how many CPA communities they are, how their politics run, and that sort of thing. But that's something we're trying to do this year, and that's what we work on every year to try to get more money for the program. So the last I'll say on the match is just to give you an indication of what that fee increase did to the trust fund. In the last full year, when we had the old $25 fee, the trust fund brought in about 24 million or 23.2 million. So all the communities in the state shared a pot of 23.2 million. The first year of the new fee collection, it was 82 million. So you can see how much of an impact that had. We had really dropped down very low. That 23 million was going to deliver an 11% match. We got some surplus money that year. We got 20 million that year too. So the match wasn't quite low. But if we hadn't gotten surplus money, the match would have been 11%. And the next year, it would have been single digits. So this was really overdue on the part of the legislature. And we're very grateful that they finally agreed to support the program in that way. All right, any questions on the trust fund money? All right, so one of your jobs is to prepare a CPA budget every year and present that to town meeting. In the same way the selectmen and the finance committee prepare a general municipal budget and present it to town meeting. Your town sort of now has two parallel budgets, and they don't mix in any way, shape, or form. General municipal budget and the CPA budget. And the CPA budget comes from you folks. You're the only ones who can propose a CPA budget to town meeting. The selectmen can't do it themselves, the finance committee can't do it themselves. You folks have to prepare that budget and vote to send it off to town meeting. Normally that's done at the same time as the regular municipal budget process, but some communities do it differently. Rockport has a fall town meeting every single year. They do their CPA budget in the fall because spring is very busy and everyone's really distracted. And there's a lot of agita and gnashing of teeth and, horse trading on the budget, on the municipal budget. So they want to be out of that. They do their budget in the fall. But most communities do it in the spring at the same time. And you vote on it at your annual spring town meeting. Like I said, it does require you folks to prepare that and vote on it and make a recommendation, and then the selectmen put it on the warrant. Obviously, you need your help of your municipal officials to prepare that budget because they're going to have to get you the revenue figures. They'll have to get you the local revenue figures. DOR will provide you with what they estimate the state match will be. So you'll combine those two things and you'll prepare a budget. So your budget is based on the local money that you project for the next fiscal year and the estimated trust fund match. Okay? Interest is not put into your budget. You could, but no one does. It's just deposited in your fund at the end of the year is the way people deal with their interest. So any question on how the budget, the top line numbers of how the budget is prepared? Okay. So the great thing about CPA is it doesn't tell you a lot of what you have to do with your money. It's your money. Even the state matching money, the minute that check arrives at town hall and deposited in your CPA fund, the state now considers it to be local money. It's not tracked separately. It's not state money anymore. It's all your money at this point. The state money and the local money is combined, and it's up to you folks on how to spend that. But they do have one rule, which is every year, your CPA program has to either spend or reserve for later spending 10% of your total revenue in each of these three areas. Okay, so if you expect 200,000 in revenue, and when we did our calculations, that's about what we thought you folks would get. Probably need to check with your municipal officials to see what their estimate is, but it's somewhere around 200,000. Is that, Michelle, do you remember?
Yes, and I think we got an estimate from you guys, and we got an estimate from our assessor's office, and it was very close.
Around 200,000?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So that means every year you have to either spend $20,000 on a housing project that town meeting votes on, or you have to take that 20,000 and transfer it to the housing reserve account. Both require action by town meeting. Town meeting has to vote to approve any project, and they have to vote to approve that expenditure. Although if it's just a transfer, it's a pro forma vote. You have to do it. If town meeting didn't vote to put that money in, you'd be in violation of the law. Your municipal officials over the summer would be told by DOR to move that money. So it's kind of a pro forma vote if you're transferring it rather than spending it. So 10% goes in the housing reserve account, 10% goes in the open space and recreation reserve account. These two categories of CPA share a reserve account. It's a long story, but they do. When we say open space with CPA, we mean conservation land and things that happen on conservation land. By recreation, we mean parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, trails, community gardens, active recreation. So conservation land, active recreation. Any projects in those two categories can be funded out of the 10% open space and recreation reserve. And then 10% has to be spent or reserved on historic preservation. The rest of the budget is totally flexible. One thing you can do is you could put some money in an administrative fund. Up to 5% of your total revenue can be transferred to an administrative fund. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that can be spent on and who controls that in a minute. But that's the limit on that. 5% of the budget can go to that. So any questions on the overall parameters of the budget? Okay, now we're going to talk about your FY23 budget. because you folks weren't organized last spring, right? So you weren't here in time to do a recommendation to town meeting. Spring town meeting did not vote an FY23 budget for the community preservation program in Lakeville. That's not a problem. Most communities are not organized in time in their first year to have a budget. And if you end up not having a budget, at the end of the fiscal year, DOR will tell your municipal officials to move 10% into these two accounts, and the rest of the money will just drop into what's called your CPA fund balance. Just drop into your general account and be there for you in the future when you do projects. But the problem with not having a budget for FY23 is that you don't have, did I skip a slide? Yes. No, I didn't. You would not have an administrative budget for FY23 unless you get town meeting to approve that. So what you can consider is doing an FY23 budget at your fall town meeting. You have a fall town meeting coming up. Did I put the date on here? When is it? It's in November, I think, Mark?
November 14th.
Whatever.
Yeah. According to your website, excuse me. Yeah, 9/22. According to your website, the warrant closes on 9/22. So you do have time to take a vote as a committee and recommend a budget to town meeting. And then if they pass that, you would have an administrative budget for anything you needed between now and June 30th. And you'd have those reserve accounts set up as well.
Stuart,
Yes,
if I may, I think last meeting that we had, there was a question as to how complicated that might be.
could not be more simple. Because this is what a budget would look like for FY23. It's this first year, you have no projects. If you have no projects, a budget is so simple. All you're doing is putting money in the different accounts and transferring it into there and appropriating that 5% for administrative. So your budget would ask for $20,000 to go into the housing reserve account, assuming that the town officials agree with $200,000 as a rough estimate of your revenue. Remember, this year your revenue is only the local program. You don't even have to worry. That even makes it easier. You don't have to worry about the state match because you're not getting one this year in FY23. So the budget would put $20,000 in the housing reserve, $20,000 in this reserve, $20,000 in this reserve. And then we would suggest that you ask for 5% or $10,000 for an administrative fund. You don't have any project recommendations. And then the balance would be transferred to an account called the budgeted reserve. That's a municipal accounting maneuver. It's the same thing in your regular budget. You put money in certain accounts that allows the money to be available to you if there was a town meeting anytime during FY23 that you wanted to spend that money.
So what would be, why would this be a good thing to do? I guess I don't understand why you would need to do this when we have so many other things to do.
Okay,
We have a lot of other things to do, and
Yep.
at our last meeting, we voted to, the town has offered to give us $5,000 to use for what we need in the first year, and we voted that I sent a letter to our town accountant, or I guess through the Board of Selectmen, to that, yes, we would like that, so we have that. So why would
Right.
we want to use money that we don't have yet?
okay, great question.
Okay.
A number of reasons. First of all, where's that $5,000 coming from?
General fund.
Is it already appropriated? That can
It's
be
going to
used?
fall town meeting. Would
It-
save us from doing this so
Okay.
that we took an
So-
hour and a half, excuse me.
Yep.
We took an hour and a half just to work on a survey for we have a large arts festival, October 1st in Lakeville, and we wanted to get that survey done so that we're gonna have a booth to start getting some public opinion in. And that took an hour and a half just to do that survey. We have a long way to go and a lot of things to do, so I don't see why we really don't need to do, we have plenty of time to do this
Right.
for the Springtown meeting.
Okay, now let me tell you why I strongly would suggest you do this. First of all, that $5,000 is taking away from what the town has to spend on other things. It's taking away from the schools or the police or the roads or something like that. And CPA is not designed to make things more difficult for your town. It's designed to bring in new revenue to help the town. So it's not a ton of money, but you are taking that from some other program in town and the town's ability to spend that. That's number one. Number two, you would actually have more money available if you did the 10%, but you're not going to need all that money. And by the way, when they appropriate the money, most communities do not spend the money, and it automatically is transferred back into your CPA fund at the end of the fiscal year when the town closes its books. This is another big reason why. If you don't do a budget, when the tax rate is set in Lakeville, which happens in late November, early December, is that about when the tax rate is set?
Not sure.
Yeah, that's when it's set. Do you have 4 times a year billing? The tax bills go out 4 times a year or 2? Okay,
Or-
if they go out 4 times a year, your town is gonna set their tax rate in late November, early December, required by the Department of Revenue. Once they set that tax rate, you will lose access to all of this money. You will not have access to this money until next summer when the town closes its books. So if you wanted to do projects, for example, at Springtown meeting, you would not be able to use any of this money. The only money you would have available to you is FY24 money. So if something comes up between now and then in a project, something that's an emergency or something that's a great opportunity, a piece of land comes up that you want to buy, an APR on a farm that's going to close, you don't know what's going to happen in the next year. You will not have access to any of this money until next summer when the town closes its books, which means you really won't have access to it until your town meeting's already gonna have happened. So you really won't have access to this money until the spring 2024, if you don't do a budget now. So,
I got a question, can you clarify this, because there's a couple things.
yep,
So I was under the understanding after that you couldn't appropriate anything this year because you can't appropriate funds that you don't have, even if it's in.
nope, that's incorrect.
Okay.
So
Even if
CPA does not, that's called the receipts reserved account, where you can't spend the money until the town has actually collected it. CPA does not work that way, nor does your town budget work that way. Think about it. On July 1st, when your fiscal year starts, you haven't collected a penny in taxes, right? The first tax bills don't go out till August. But on July 7th, you get a paycheck. The school teachers get a paycheck. The fire department gets a paycheck. The police department gets a paycheck. The paper vendor who delivered copier paper gets paid. You still haven't collected a penny in taxes. That's the way CPA works. On July 1st, whatever is put in your budget is available to use. So you absolutely can appropriate money this year. CPA does not, there's no relationship between when you actually spend the money and when the money comes in during that fiscal year. The entire budget is available on July 1st, as long as you have a town meeting appropriation to spend
And
it.
why you can't do that in April rather than November?
Because of the way municipal accounting rules work, once the tax rate is set, if you have not put the anticipated revenue for that tax year in an account, in a budgeted reserve account or in a reserve account or an administrative fund, you lose access to it. You have to do a budget. This applies for your general municipal fund too.
I thought we were already collecting the money.
We are collecting.
But there's no relationship between what, you can't spend it until town meeting passes a budget.
Right, but we had planned on putting a budget together, putting projects out this winter, putting a budget together that would be on next spring's town meeting,
Right.
so
You
we
won't be
would,
able to spend any of this money. You would only be able to spend FY24 money.
I thought we would be spending that money starting July 1.
Nope, can't do it. You can't even appropriate this money at next spring's town meeting because it's an uncertain amount. You will not be able to even appropriate that
So
money
what would we spend come July 1 if we didn't do this? Nothing?
July 1 of next year.
Yeah.
You'd only have your FY24 money to work with.
So we'd have future money.
Right, you would not have the money you've already collected. Someone, this is a great point. When I explained this to someone said, only in Massachusetts can you spend what you don't have yet, but you can't spend what you already collected and have in the bank. Only in Massachusetts. So next spring's town meeting, you would not be able to have the 200,000 that you have in the bank, but you would be able to spend FY24 money that you haven't collected yet. That's the way it works.
So if we don't do a budget this fall, we actually lose the 200,000?
No, it'll come back to you next summer when the town finally calculates. It's not gonna be exactly 200,000, it's gonna be $206,422.35. But until they do the accounting on that and certify that with DOR, then you get it put back into your account. But basically, the day your tax rate is set, it goes into a black hole of purgatory, and you can't touch it, you can't appropriate it, you can't spend it, can't do anything until the town certifies the books next summer. And then by then, you'll have your spring town meeting, so you really won't be able to spend that money until spring of '24. So this is totally up to you. I have no stake in this, but I prepared a warrant article. This is the standard DOR warrant article, the way they tell communities to do budgets. Someone can make a motion tonight at this meeting to ask the selectmen to put this on the warrant, and you can send a memo to them
We
tomorrow.
can't do any votes tonight. The
Why
only
not?
thing on our agenda tonight are training and meeting with Concom. We haven't put anything on.
Well,
We
you
put
can
it
do
on
things
next
that you didn't anticipate, the chair did not anticipate coming up, and you certainly didn't anticipate
We've
this coming
had
up.
a few dings lately for not having things on our agenda, so I'm not.
We have upcoming meetings, we can, before the close of. the
Oh,
warrant,
great.
So that
Perfect.
we
Yeah, we have a
can
meeting
put
next
it
week,
on
the
and discuss
21st.
it.
We can put it
perfect.
on the agenda and do it
But
correctly.
doesn't the warrant close the
Yeah,
next
it
day,
closes on
the
the
22nd?
We'd have to do it today and ratify
Yeah,
it
you could,
next meeting.
Nancy, you could call the selectmen tomorrow and just say, put a placeholder on, and then if you guys want to do it next week, you could, and just give the selectmen a heads up.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to leave to,
Yep.
we go to that meeting,
I'll have
so.
a couple more copies, anyone want one?
I'll have one.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so that's the FY '20. That's what we would recommend, but it's totally up to you.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
bye.
you'll be fine.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so come spring, you're gonna have to do an FY '24 budget, right? So you're gonna work with your municipal officials. You're gonna ask them, probably to January or so, you're gonna ask them for an estimate of what you feel the community is gonna collect from FY '24's local surcharge. That'll probably be like $220,000, goes up a little bit every year. You'll have an estimate from DOR of the trust fund that you're gonna get. You're gonna get a trust fund match in November of '23. That's gonna be revenue to FY '24. It's revenue to you the year you actually physically get the check, right? So in FY '24, you're gonna have two funding sources, your local money and your first check. And you're gonna have to then put that into a budget recommendation. You'll use that format right there for it. You just change it to say FY '24. You might have projects at that point, probably not, but you may. And you will make that recommendation for the spring town meeting, and then town meeting will vote on that budget. So, any questions on what you're gonna do sometime in the middle of the year for FY '24?
So in January, we're gonna ask the town offices for an estimate of the fiscal '24
Local revenue,
local revenue.
right. And you'll see it in our newsletter. We'll start talking then about what we think the estimate will be from the state, for the state match. Unfortunately, DOR doesn't put that out in as early as we'd like it to see come out. It sometimes doesn't come out till March. So it gets kind of tight in terms of taking that figure from DOR and then you guys having a meeting and voting on that budget. But we keep you abreast of what DOR is doing, and we bug them too, that folks need that match estimate. They need it. So you'll want to keep a close eye on when the selectmen close the warrant, and make sure you get your recommendation in. Even if it's only at that point, for whatever reason, DOR is late, you'll just put in an estimate. You could always move it on town meeting floor with an adjustment of the numbers. Doesn't matter.
So I think we should move on this. I think if we don't, we're gonna be missing a whole year.
Yeah.
So I'd
I
like
think
to.
we should move on it on our meeting on the 21st. It needs to be on the agenda before we vote. I already said we weren't going to do, that's why this agenda looks like this, because we're not having a meeting where we're taking votes on things. I think the 21st is plenty of time. Mark will get it to the selectmen, so they'll put a place marker on it. But we've been in trouble for some of our agendas in town, and not just CPA. I mean, I'm trying to get CPA off on the right foot. We need to have things on our agenda. because we've already had a few dings.
I think we all
About-
want it on the right foot, and I think this is on the right foot. And I think we should take a vote tonight and put it on the next agenda to ratify the vote. That's perfectly acceptable. Like he said, if there's something that comes up that wasn't expected, I think this is a lot of information that some people here have not been aware of. I think it's worth considering because we're gonna have to wait a full year.
Right, and
If
if
not-
something comes up and we don't have this money in the budget, we're not gonna be able to move on it.
Right.
Right,
If
I don't
there's a Chapter
disagree,
61
but I think it can wait till our meeting on the 21st.
It's.
The Attorney General, not
really
the
pushing
Attorney
it
General.
close.
Well, I think the meeting of the 21st is fine to be able to do this and digest it a little bit instead of
Question.
rushing it.
But how are we gonna get it to the next day is when the warrant closes. We're not gonna be able to do that and send it to the selectmen the next day.
We'll have it
are we?
ready. We have it all ready to give to them the
So they're
next
gonna-
morning.
So they're gonna do a placeholder then? You're gonna ask for a placeholder?
I'm gonna ask for a placeholder.
Well, I think we should ask for a placeholder
Okay.
as a committee.
I don't want to vote on anything that's not
Well,
on
I'm
the
gonna make a
agenda.
motion
Well, let me
to
finish.
accept
Excuse me,
this
please.
budget and send a
Excuse me, please. I'm
recommendation
not finished.
to the select
We've
board.
been through this before. I'm not finished.
Nancy,
Shh.
this
I'm
is,
the chairman. You need to be, we go by Robert's Rules of Order. When I'm finished talking, you can talk as much as you want. All right?
I
We've
was
been through
making a
this
motion,
before. We've been advised by the town clerk about this being a new committee, following Robert's Rules of Order and sticking to the agenda. And it has to be exact. And I don't think it's too long to wait till the 21st to do it. We'll talk to Mark about talking to the selectmen about putting on a hold, or that we intend or would like to put this on the warrant. And I don't see why not. He was here when it was explained about using the money, and he seemed fine with it.
he still
So-
seemed confused, I think.
Well, maybe he wants to look into it a little more, maybe we all do. But I'm not
I
comfortable
made
with
a
voting on something that's not on the agenda.
Well,
Okay,
I
go
made a
ahead.
motion to accept this article, to request the select board put it on the fall town meeting warrant. Speak up.
Second.
I have I have a motion and a second. Let's take a vote. All in-
I have a question.
You have to talk about discussion.
Okay, discussion.
No, I can't make the meeting on the 21st. I just want to make sure that my absence will not affect the vote.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We only need 4 for a quorum.
You need 5 for.
5 for a
Five.
quorum, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you need 5.
So
Even
1,
the
2,
fact that you
3,
don't have a
4.
housing authority member, but
I
they
will
still
not be here on
count.
the
So you
21st.
need 5 of the 9.
Well, Nancy LaFave will be here on the
Yep.
21st, so we'll have a quorum.
Okay.
All right, again, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I think we wait till the 21st.
All right, so the motion carries.
I don't want to cut it close. We got to do this right. We don't want to miss out.
And if you see, Nancy, any issues with this, you
1,
could
2,
always
3,
revote it too
4.
at the next meeting, if you wanted to make
Well,
any
yeah,
adjustments.
because we would have to ratify it at the next meeting with another majority, right?
No, but if you want to make any changes, since you made a motion to accept that, then you would need to do it again at the next meeting if you want to make any changes to it. So, this way you can run it by your municipal officials, make sure they're okay with that number, and you could revote it if you have to at your meeting next week. Because they'll already have it as a placeholder, right? So, all right.
And make sure we didn't violate any rules too. Town clerk will let us know if we were allowed to vote the agenda too.
All right, well, it does say that at the, I'll talk to the town clerk about it,
Just to make sure it's kosher.
right?
All right, should we move on? Because I know we have a deadline, right? Okay.
Yes.
The administrative account, let's talk about that for a minute. So as you know, you can ask every year for up to 5% of your total revenue to be put into an administrative fund. That is an appropriation, so town meeting, when they voted on it, would be appropriating that money to you. And now to spend it, it's just a majority vote of your committee. That money is available to you for things that might come up. Like I said, we recommend you do ask for 5% every year, but you don't have to. You could come up with a set amount. You can ask up to $10,000 if it's a $200,000 budget. Next year, you'll be able to ask for more because you'll have the state money as well. But you could just say, we want to ask for 8,000, whatever it is. There's no harm in asking for the full 5% because the town, when they close the books every year, will automatically take whatever you didn't spend and put it back in your fund balance, which is where all your CPA money ends up at the end of the year. So that's different than the regular town budget. If the DPW has a budget for $500,000 and they only spend $490,000, they lose that $10,000. It doesn't stay in a DPW account. It goes back to the town's general fund and they get a new budget. That doesn't happen with CPA. If you don't use the administrative money, it goes into your CPA fund. So it's different. The thing that I'll point out is this is for an expense budget for your committee. It's for expenses for running your committee. It is not the CPA expense budget for the CPA program in Lakeville. Let me say that again. It is your committee's expense budget. It is not the CPA program expense budget for Lakeville. There is no CPA program expense budget for Lakeville. If Mark spends time working on CPA issues, like he spent an hour at this meeting, that's part of his normal job. If the town clerk spends money answering your question, Nancy, that's part of his normal job. If the selectmen spend time, preparing the warrant and moving your article around and figuring out where it's going to go, that's part of their job. Everyone in town, conservation agent, parks director is going to be working on projects. Those folks all get a full-time salary from the town, and whatever they're going to be doing on CPA is just part of their job the same way everything else is. So no town officials can ever charge the CPA budget for their time spent working on CPA. And no CPA money can reimburse the town for something they spend. So if the town does something, and then they come to you afterwards and say, well, gee, we had to do that quick, but it should have come out of the administrative budget. You can't do that. You can never have CPA money flow back into the town's general fund. So that's called supplanting. That's prohibited by Section 6 of CPA. So this is an important thing to remember. So what can you use and what do folks use their administrative fund for? Well, the number one thing they do is they hire staff to support the CPC. It has to be new staff. You can't use someone that's already on the staff and pay them out of the CPA fund. If they're willing to assign someone like Peter, right? Is that his name? Mark, sorry. Did I say Peter a number of times?
No.
Oh, okay, good. If they've assigned Mark and he's willing to spend time on CPA, that's great, because that's just coming out of, the planning department budget. But if you folks wanted different support staff, that would come out of the CPA administrative account. Who's taking minutes tonight? No one's taking minutes tonight. It doesn't matter. You can, as long as someone takes the attendance and writes down who, and then you just put down educational presentation from the Community Preservation Coalition and that one vote you took as well. That's very simple minutes for tonight, but the minutes won't always be simple, right? You're gonna have a lot of debate. This is a training session. This is actually an exemption to the open meeting law for training. But it gets tiring for the volunteers to take the minutes, right? Nancy, who takes some of the conscom?
Well, when we are usually on cable, so the secretarial pool at the town hall can take the minutes from.
Oh, really? Really? Oh, they do that for all the boards?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
Well,
for
we-
Concom,
yeah.
anything that's cableized.
yeah, we hired someone to do that now.
That's
That was our
awesome.
meeting.
I've never heard of that. That is a great idea. But if you had a technical difficulty, someone would have to know that and jump in to take notes contemporaneously, right? Yeah. But if you wanted to hire someone to take minutes to come to your meetings, that's an example of an administrative account. You folks, when you start getting project ideas coming at you and applications coming at you, you might want to hire consultants to look at these. If you get a plan to redo a historic building and you don't know if it's being done to proper historic standards, you might want to get a historic preservation consultant to look at the plans before you send them to town meeting, because you don't want someone in the town meeting to stand up for and say, you know, this is not in keeping with the proper historic standards, right? That would be embarrassing. You want to have that reviewed ahead of time. If the Open Space Committee or the CONSCOM comes to you and says, hey, we have a great opportunity to buy a farm or a piece of open space, the CPA law requires you folks to do an appraisal prior to that. So that when you tell town meeting, we want to buy this piece of land for $300,000, that you know the appraisal says it's worth $300,000. That can come out of the administrative account. Yeah.
You just made me think of something I wanted to ask you. So Plymouth has a set protocol for when a chapter property is removed from chapter protection. And the protocol actually calls out in it that those appraisals, one of the steps is that the appraisal is covered by the CPA fund. So I was curious, you know, without allocating that money specifically, is there a way of using, so it would come out of the administrative fund rather than the open space?
So what you probably are missing there is that if the CPA votes to okay that, they can't just take the money, you folks to spend any money in the administrative account. No problem. You want us to, okay. Oh, we didn't know you were successful in getting out.
Maybe a minute or two.
Oh, excellent, okay.
Nice presentation.
All right, so would you prefer me to go back over here and kind of stay in my place here?
No, that's fine.
Either way, okay,
Pick one.
great. So I think what you're missing is the CPC is probably having a meeting to vote that, because it can't come out of the administrative fund unless you folks have a meeting and okay that.
Is it possible to do that at one town meeting, or would it have to be every year?
Every year.
Every year.
So the CPC administrative budget, great question, Michelle. The CPA administrative budget is what's called an operating budget. That's the only CPA budget that only lasts for a year. Okay, so town meeting gives you an FY23 administrative budget. You spend what you spend. The rest of it is automatically closed to your fund balance, and town meeting has to give you a new administrative budget for FY24. Okay, so the administrative budget is only for 1 year. All the other CPA accounts carry forward. Your open space reserve, every year if you put more money in there and you don't spend it, that just keeps adding up in your open space reserve. So the administrative budget, though, has to be approved by town meeting every year. You can't carry forward any of that money into the administrative budget. So any kind of, you know, you'll get project recommendations and you'll want to get more information on that, and it may be costly, it may be a cost to doing that. You might want to ask town council for a legal opinion on something. If you folks ask town council for that, you have to usually go through the town manager's office to access town council, but don't, you know, have the town lawyer itemize that expense and charge it to your administrative budget. The town has a very limited budget. You don't want to be spending any of the town's money when it's legitimately can be spent out of CPA, which is why I think asking town meeting for $5,000 from the general fund is not at all a recommended best practice. I've actually never seen that done in 16 years, to use administrative funds from the town.
I actually thought it was a nice gesture on the part of the
It is.
powers that
Yeah, they
be.
offered it.
Yeah,
We didn't ask, they
Yeah.
asked us to ask, so
Yeah,
I
they
thought
probably
that
didn't
was
realize
very
how
nice.
simple it was to do a budget, and that's why they offered it, because they thought you were going to not have an administrative budget this year. But in the same way town meeting has to vote to appropriate that $5,000, they could be a vote to appropriating the $5,000 from CPA. And then it's kind of a win-win for you folks if you want to do it that way. You have to advertise the public hearing. You know, that's an example of something that can be paid out of the administrative budget and that sort of thing. So the common denominator is you folks have to vote to approve it. And it has to be something that benefits your committee in terms of its duties and responsibilities. Not something that is something that's a town expense for CPA. All right, so that's what we have on budgeting. Now we're going to go to the other half. We've now taken in the money and allocated it to the accounts. Now what can you spend it on? What's what we call allowable uses of CPA funds? The one thing I will say about the overall CPA fund is that it is very different than the municipal fund. And you've never had CPA before, so this is the first time experience. But for the most part, your general municipal budget is a top-down affair. You know, there's not too much an ordinary citizen can do to impact the town's budget. It's the finance committee, the selectmen, capital budgeting, department heads, staff. That's really who sets the priorities. Town meeting, of course, has to vote on it, but I don't know about your town, but most towns don't make too many edits to the municipal budget at town meeting. Usually it just flies right through. So it's very top down. CPA is designed to be, the exact opposite. By definition, it is the community's fund. It's called the Community Preservation Fund. And the idea is that the ideas don't come from the top, they come from the bottom. It's a grassroots program. Anyone can come to you guys and say, I have a great idea for CPA. It's designed to get people to really think big, to dream about what things can we do in Lakeville to improve the quality of life here that we've never had money for before. You know, it's very difficult to, in the face of police and fire and roads and schools, to generate quality of life things. They're usually the first thing that get cut. When CPA was passed in Salem, I'll never forget, Doug, the parks director, he had almost had tears in his eyes after it passed when he came up to me. And he said, I haven't had a dime of capital money for any park in Salem in 15 years. He was just over the moon. And those are the kind of things that CPA can do. So it's designed, that's why it forces you as a program to get out into the community and to get people's input. That survey is a great idea, Nancy, to really get out there, let people know this funding is there, get the ideas, have them come to you, and the ideas flow up. These budgets both end up in the same place, town meeting, right? Town meeting gets final say on this budget, and town meeting gets final say on this budget. But the way those are constructed and presented to town meeting should be exactly the opposite. Now, we see communities that do that really well and really get it and have a very independent CPC where the quality of life is number one. And then we see also communities that handle it the other way. And, you know, the ideas all flow down and there's very tight control and the CPC becomes a rubber stamp for what the town wants to do. And that's up to you folks as to how your town wants to run the CPA program. This is not written down in the law anywhere, but if you read the CPA legislation and try to figure out what did the legislature intend here, it's very clear that it is the community's fund as opposed to just another 1% on top of the general municipal budget. It's very different. So food for thought as you run your CPA program, because this very much falls on you folks and how you want to, what kind of program you want to have. All right, so now let's dig into, as the last big thing we have tonight, what can you spend this money on? This is the most important piece of paper or slide in the whole CPA universe. This is called the Allowable Uses Chart. It's a simplified version of a Department of Revenue chart. The full version is on our website. You can download it from DOR. It's different in that it has definitions for all these words, because all these words have definitions in the CPA legislation. I got to stay in front of the microphone. Sorry about that. And the DOR version is, has all the definitions written in those boxes, but otherwise it's the same. And this should be your first place you go to when you try to figure out, can we spend CPA money on something? Some communities, some CPCs put it on a big chart, they blow it up and they put it up on the wall, when they start their meeting, or they plop down an allowable uses chart right in the middle of the desk, because whenever you're thinking, can we do that with CPA funds, or is that allowable? This is the chart that you first consult to figure it out. So how do you use the CPA allowable uses chart to figure out whether you can do something with CPA funds or not? Well, the four categories are very simple, right? Everyone knows the four categories of CPA. It has to be in one of those four categories. But unfortunately, there had to be some rules and some hard lines around what is allowable. So not every historic expenditure is allowable under CPA. Not every housing expenditure is allowable under CPA. What is required of CPA is it has to be in those four categories, and the expenditure has to be justified by one of those verbs that you see on the left-hand side. You have to be acquiring something, creating something, preserving, supporting, or rehabilitating. Each of those words has definitions. Each of these categories has definitions, You can't just say, oh yeah, that's historic. No, there's a definition in the CPA legislation. A historic resource is a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact. has to be one of those 6 things. It has to be on the State Register of Historic Places, or your historic commission has to vote to deem it significant. So that's the definition of a historic resource. It's not just someone up to say, oh yeah, that's historic. So you need to actually look very closely at the projects, and usually you have to look at the budget and go line item by line item on the application, which is why it's so critical for anyone who's asking for CPA money to submit a budget, an estimated budget, they're not gonna know exactly, with line items. Here's what the money is actually gonna be spent on. A lot of folks get caught up where they rely on the description of the project. Well, we're gonna fix up the park, you know, it's in bad shape, someone hurt themselves last year, it needs new stuff, you know, they describe the project, but that's not something you can act on. You have to act on, can we spend $4,000 on a new teeter-totter? Can we spend $5,000 on wood chips? That's what you need to look at. And you have to take each of those expenditures and
Kathleen?
find a box on the allowable uses chart where that expenditure fits. Yep,
Question.
yep, I saw that.
Oh,
Let me
okay.
just finish. So you go line item by line item in the budget, and you have to find a box that justifies each of those line items. And obviously it has to say yes instead of no.
So, for example, if housing committee was developed and asked for CPA money to create an affordable housing plan,
Uh-huh,
that would be okay.
okay, so let's look at that.
But
Great
it's
example.
not okay for historic, is that?
Exactly. So let's look at that. Okay. So first of all, they want to create a CPA plan, right?
No, they want to create an affordable
Oh,
housing.
sorry,
plan.
an affordable housing plan. Yes, yes. Okay. So there's a definition for what's an allowable housing expense. It has to be something that's geared toward people who earn less than 100% of the area-wide median income. If you read the definition in the housing, by the way, all the definitions in CPA are in section 2 of the legislation. The legislation is 17 pages. I would encourage you all to read it. Don't read it late at night. You might not make it through the whole thing. But if you're only going to read a piece of it, read section 2. In any law in the Commonwealth, the rubber meets the road in the definitions. Every law has a definition section. For CPA, it's section 2. So it would, if you looked at the word housing, it actually calls it community housing. It would say housing and things for people who are under 100% of the AMI. So if the study of the housing plan was how do we do things to benefit people who are 100% or less of the AMI, that would be, you now have a housing project, okay? But now, what is the money actually being spent on? It's being spent to hire a consultant, right? To write a plan. Okay, so here's how to use the chart. Is this plan acquiring a piece of housing or land which is going to be used for housing? Are you buying a piece of something? No. Are you creating an affordable housing unit? No. Are you protecting from injury, harm, or destruction an actual affordable housing unit? Nope. Is this expenditure support the housing category? I would say an affordable housing plan supports the general affordable housing category in CPA. So, yes, we found a box where this fits, and it's an allowable expense.
But it's not for historic or recreation.
It is not. So, you asking why? Because I can answer that.
Yeah.
So the legislature knew this category was going to be your toughest challenge. This is going to be a challenge in Lakeville. It's a challenge everywhere. It's tough to build housing. It's expensive, it's politically charged, it takes years, it's hard. And they wanted to give every possible tool in the toolbox to CPA committees to get at the housing issues in town, including general support. Because normally, before you put a shovel in the ground, you've got years and years and years of soft costs and studies and, you know, perk tests. It's just unbelievable the amount of soft costs you have before you even get to the point where you can put a shovel on the ground. But they knew municipalities are strapped for money, right? This is why there's that line between what CPA can do and the general fund. They knew if they opened up these other categories, you know, communities could not resist the, you know, moving over some of their Parks and Recs budget to CPA for some of those support activities the Parks and Recs department did, or the CONSCOM did on the open space they already have control of. So they were very careful to say, this is the category, the only category where general support activities can be expended. Yeah, Nancy?
Under open space, if you have a piece of open space and you need a forest management plan, would that be under support and, under preserve?
Nope,
No.
no.
So that would be a no.
That would be a no.
Okay.
Yep, that would definitely be a no. Preserve is a physical action to protect the land from injury, harm, or destruction. There's a definition for preserve. CPA is all about the land. When you go to these four categories, it's all about the real estate. It's about historic buildings or hard assets like artifacts. It's about opens, parks, playgrounds, athletic fields. It's about affordable housing units and land where you're going to build units. It's about open space land. CPA is all about the land. So everything
Right.
comes back to the land.
But what if your land's in danger? We're having a disease with the beech trees and we can't afford to go in and cut them down so the rest of them don't get infected. That would still be a no
Yeah, there's very little you can do
with open
in
space?
the open space. This is where 95% of the open space money is spent. It's on acquiring new pieces of open space. Basically what CPA said, if you have a piece of open space that you already own, you really can't touch it with CPA funds.
What if your open space has a building on it? Then they can hop over to recreation?
No, CPA, we're going to learn about that in a second. Recreation category is only for outdoor recreation. It specifically says no buildings. So,
On Nancy's example, though, if you're trying to preserve, say, the trees on that land, and you need money to support that effort,
right.
could that be supported?
These are all fact specific. What are you actually doing to preserve those trees? Is it a study? Is
I
it?
don't know, what would you do?
It's very fact specific.
Well,
It's hard to
sometimes
answer.
if you have a disease and you have 1,000 trees and 10 of them are affected or
Right.
more, and you gotta get rid of them to save the rest of them, I would say preserve would fit into that category.
Yeah, the only thing is, I would say that's honestly a rehabilitation activity. Preserve is to protect future harm or destruction. Rehabilitate is to fix a problem that's already there. The only thing I've ever seen at preserve is removing invasive species sometimes is allowable. I did see DOR opine that was okay because they will take over and destroy all the land. I've seen that. But there's in general, I know your CONSCOM is not going to be happy about this, but most land that you already own that's open space, there's going to be very little you can do with CPA. And there was a reason for that. You guys all know about Prop 2.5, right? Anyone ever heard of Barbara Anderson? As a matter of fact, I think her partner, she passed away a few years ago. She was the one that got Prop 2.5 passed. I think her partner, Chip Ford, lived in Lakeville, actually. Anyone ever heard of Chip Ford? In any case, he was the associate director of Citizens for Limited Taxation. When CPA came up as an idea, they blocked it for 10 years because they said, we worked so hard to get Prop 2.5, and now you want to create a law that allows communities to raise their taxes another 3%. Then we're going to have Prop 5. If they can use that money for the same things their regular budget can be used for, we got Prop 5.5, and we're not going to let that happen. And that made a lot of sense to a lot of folks, and TPA didn't go anywhere. So the bargain was made. CPA will be for new initiatives, but for things the town already has, they have to take care of out of their Prop 2.5 budget. Now, when CPA was first passed, these boxes all said no in 2000. This was the first one to fall. In 2012, communities we had a lot of data that showed no one was doing anything in the recreation category. They couldn't fix up their dilapidated soccer fields. So people were saying, let's buy new land for a soccer field. And it was like, why are we going to buy new land for a soccer field when we got 10 dilapidated fields? Because we can't spend CPA money to fix those fields. We don't have any money. So we had the data to show that nothing was happening in this category. And we went back to the legislature. It took us 7 years to convince them because they remembered. And they finally made a change here to allow communities to rehabilitate their existing parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields. This one was changed in 2001, right away. Because Bedford went to rehabilitate their historic town hall, and their town council said, I can't let you do that. Because it said this in the box, it said no unless acquired or created. And town council said, I can't let you fix up town hall with it, because when you built it in 1862, you didn't use CPA money. And everyone was like, well, wait a minute, what are we gonna do in the historic category? It's all about doing this. And so it was a mistake in the law, and the legislature fixed it right away, and then they put the yes there. But when they made those two changes, they reminded folks, we're not changing these two categories. And it makes perfect sense. Here, in general, in conservation land, you let it sit. That's why you bought it, you know? And so they didn't wanna give communities a big pot of money to go mucking around on the conservation land. There's gonna be some examples where you're gonna be very frustrated that you can't do it. And, you know, it's hard because you have to have a wall somewhere, and some good projects are gonna be on the other side of that wall.
Yeah, but there are different, like, we have a historic building on our open space, so I just hopped over to a yes when I was thinking.
Oh.
I was actually thinking about the Peach Barn at Betty's Neck. It was built in 1927, so that would hop
Perfect.
over to historic.
Yep, so again, you have to zero in on what's the money being spent on. And if you're spending that money on rehabilitating a historic structure that's either on the state register or the historic commission has deemed it, it has nothing to do with open space. That's a historic structure, now you can rehabilitate it. And that's where all the money is spent in that category. In open space, it's up here. In historic, 90% of it is right here in this box.
So if a building like the Peach Barn or like the historic museum needed a new roof or something, that would count.
Yep, as long as it's not maintenance. Roofs are generally considered to be a capital improvement. We're gonna talk about that in a second.
For over 5-10 years.
Yeah,
so it's gonna-
CPA can never be spent on any maintenance, any operating expenses, any programming. CPA is a capital improvement program, all capital hard assets.
What about moving an old house?
Moving an old house. Okay, so we're assuming it's a historic resource, it's on the state register, or has been deemed to be
I
significant?
didn't assume that.
Yeah,
No, okay.
Okay.
right.
yep. All right, so one more example. This is the one I always use to help explain this. Let's say you get an application to do an oral history of World War II veterans. The Historic Commission comes and said there are only 12 World War II veterans left in town. They're all elderly, obviously. We want to capture their stories. We want to hire a professional production company, do interviews, edit that into a great video. We're going to play it on Lake TV. Did I get the name of your station right? The local
LakeCAM.
LakeCAM TV. We're going to show it in the third grade classes when they study World War II, et cetera. We want to spend $40,000 on an oral history. Okay, CPC, you guys got to figure out if that's eligible. Are you acquiring a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact? Nope. Are you preserving, protecting from injury, harm, or destruction, a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact? Nope. And you're not rehabilitating one either, right? It is not eligible for CPA funding. In fact, I'd say that project belongs here. You're doing an activity that supports general historic category. So that's kind of how you use the allowable uses chart. This will be the hardest thing you do. This is hard because there isn't a lot of detail in the act. Where there is detail is in all the legal rulings, all the DOR opinions, all the past history, all the best practices, et cetera. And so on our technical assistance hotline, 80% of our calls are to help figure out allowable uses. And in fact, when you have your first pile of applications, we're happy to set up a Zoom call, and we'll go through each of them and we'll kind of teach you how to use the chart and help you determine the allowable uses on all your first set of projects if you choose to use us for that. It's a very popular. We just did it with Shrewsbury last Friday. We got on a Zoom call with their chair, their vice chair, any committee members that wanted to, as long as it was less than a quorum, or else they would have had to post it, and their CPA administrator, and we went through each and every application. They had 18. We put them on a big spreadsheet. We had it up on the screen, and we stepped through it, applied the chart, and figured out what they're doing. All right, any questions on that? Yes?
Yeah, a couple of questions. On the recommendation, now say that your school submits a project idea for something outside. When could it be CPA, and when would it be strictly from the school budget?
Right. Schools are tough because the legislature didn't think that through, because remember, when the law was first passed by the legislature, you couldn't use it to fix up existing parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields, whether they were on school property or not. And then they opened up that category, but no one really thought through at the legislature what that meant on schools. So it does get a little sticky on schools because schools don't really meet the definition of recreation land, of dedicated, what's called Article 97 recreation land. They really don't meet that definition. But if the asset has been there and it's been used in a dedicated way for, 60 years, it's been a playground at the school or an athletic field, and it needs some rehabilitation, generally those have been okay. There are definitely some CPCs, and this is up to you folks as to how you want to spend your money, and maybe you study this as part of your plan. You could even put it right in your plan. There are some CPCs have decided, look, we spend 65% of our general fund budget on the schools. We only want to spend our recreation funds on parks, playgrounds, athletic fields that are used for the whole town. Youth sports and our parks and our community gardens and our trails that everyone uses. And that would be, you guys get to make that decision. That can be a policy you adopt at your committee. Other communities feel like those fields are going to be, they never get any money. There's never any money in the school budget. And if a CPA doesn't do it, they're going to just continue to be dilapidated. So that's a decision that you guys make as a policy. Every community decides for themselves how they want to spend their money. Some do it and some don't do the school projects. But that is definitely something to consider. The only thing, I just had this question from someone else, the only thing we recommend is if you do decide to do a school project, get a memorandum of understanding with the school board of exactly when these assets are going to be open to the public. Sometimes it's a little loosey-goosey. Can someone go run on the track, at 6 p.m. at night when school's out, or on the weekends, or in the summer when there's off season? Sometimes the school locks it up with a chain. Sometimes there's big signs that say no trespassing that make you really squeamish about going to use the track. So, if CPA funds that are funded by the entire town that are really for community assets are going to be used on school property, just have a meeting and think it out and come up with a memorandum of understanding that formalizes when the community is going to be able to have access to these resources. That's the one recommendation we make on school projects as a best practice. You'll see there's a lot of difference between the law and best practices. All right, so last few slides we have. So the CPA legislation does not say who can apply for funding. Matter of fact, it says nothing about the application process. That's really up to you guys to decide how you're going to do that, what criteria you're going to use, etc. But in general, the vast majority of CPA applications in practice come from boards or committees in town and 501c3 nonprofits in town. That's where the majority of them come. When you get down, you will get at some point some applications from a neighborhood group. They're not really an incorporated, nonprofit. They're just a group of really active citizens. You got to be careful there because there's no legal entity there to award money to. You can't hand money to a group of neighbors, right? There has to be a legal entity that is receiving this funding. Individual homeowners, people that have historic homes sometimes apply. And that can be really tricky. There's right ways to do that and there's wrong ways to do that. Cambridge and Springfield have excellent historic home rehabilitation programs, but they have structure to them and they're done in a certain way. The toughest one is privately owned historic buildings. If you have a downtown area and there's some buildings that have crumbling facades, that can really be to the public benefit to get those facades fixed up. But again, you're giving money to a private organization that's improving the value of their building. So there's a right way to do that. Usually the town gets a preservation restriction in return, which then gives the town the right to protect that building forever. That's usually how you turn a private project into something that's for the public good, is you guys get a preservation restriction back. So how do projects happen? Again, the law doesn't say this, but this is what everyone does. You come up with an application in your first year as a process. People submit that application to the CPC. You guys review that, get inputs from other boards, from town staff that you need to talk to. You then make a recommended project list and vote on that, send it to town meeting, and you need a majority vote at town meeting to do these projects. Some votes require 2/3. When you buy land, most town councils will make you pass that by 2/3, although I've seen some communities that do not. That seems to be a matter of contention. Eminent domain, very rare, but it does happen occasionally. 2/3, and bonding. If you bond against your future CPA revenue stream, which is possible, over 100 communities have bonded against their future CPA revenue stream and they don't have enough money to do a big project, that requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting as well. So, all right. So as you come up with an application, you're gonna have to write this CPA plan and you're gonna have to come up with a CPA application. When you do that, we would suggest that you use what's called the two-step application process. It's very popular. We have an article on our website at position number 8 in the URLs you're gonna get as a follow-up. And the two-step works like this. September 1st, people submit their ideas to you. And it's a simple one-page form, low barrier to entry. Fill it out, tell us your idea. Then you folks review it and decide whether it's eligible for funding or not. Not whether it's a good idea or whether you have the money, just whether it's eligible for funding. And then you invite them to submit a full application. And the reason that works so well is that sometimes people will spend a ton of time preparing an application and they get support letters and they do a budget and they write the whole thing and they submit it and you guys look at it and said, we're so sorry, but this is not eligible for funding. And someone's just wasted a lot of time and sometimes it gets ugly. Sometimes they press back them, they call their selectmen and they wanna put some political pressure on the committee, or they call the state and they try to, get a letter that says it is, it can get sticky. So if you do it in these 2 easy steps, you avoid that. And people know exactly where they stand. They know it's eligible. You're not saying you're gonna fund it. You're just saying it's eligible and you invite them to submit a full application. This is a best practice. This is not, you don't have to do this. But West Tisbury was the first one to come up with this. It's been hugely successful and most new communities have adopted the 2-step process. And there are examples, you can just copy the application and then adjust it to your pleasure from other communities. So it's a great recommendation that we would make. And you'll see more on it at that URL when you get your application. So once you've made your recommendation to town meeting, the action of town meeting is a little bit more limited than a general warrant article. Town meeting can approve your recommendation. They can reject your recommendation. They can approve it, but lower the amount. And this last one is an accounting maneuver that I've never seen used. Basically, if you were counting on that project to be your 10% historic project for that year and town meeting votes no, technically you'd be in violation of the requirement to spend or reserve 10% on historic. I don't know how this would work in actuality on town meeting floor. I don't know how after the project was voted down and then everyone realized now we're in violation of the 10%, how you'd fix that on town meeting floor. So I've never seen that used. The easiest way to do that is to automatically put the 10% in your reserve account every year. Then you know you've satisfied that requirement and you have a paper trail that you've satisfied that requirement. But some communities prefer not to put it in the reserve and have projects designated as the 10%. But that can be tricky if the project gets turned down at town meeting. So any questions on that? That makes sense to folks? Okay. And then I think this is the last slide. There are some general kind of things that we've maybe touched on or maybe not. So we kind of put this as a catch-all slide of some basic tenets of CPA. We've talked about the supplanting issue, right? CPA money can never go back into the general fund and it can't replace something that is usually spent out of the general fund. You can never use CPA funds on maintenance, operating expenses, programming, things like that. It's a capital improvement program. The recreation category is actually a subset of open space. It's actually land. DOR's phrase is as close as possible to its natural state. So it specifically says no stadiums, gymnasiums, or similar structures. So it's about parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, community gardens, trails, pickleball courts. Do you have pickleball courts in town?
Yes.
You do. You guys are very lucky. It is the hottest thing in CPA. Like 60 communities have appropriated money for pickleball.
Just started doing the courts over again, resurfacing them and everything. So.
Excellent. It is so hot right now. Everyone is spending CPA money on that. You probably will need more of them soon if people continue to play this.
That was Parks money.
Yeah. Well, they may come to you for 4 more pickleball courts at some point. Skateboard parks, anything outdoor. It cannot be spent on any indoor recreational buildings of any kind. Whenever you buy something with CPA funds, it has to be permanently protected to that category. So if you buy a piece of conservation land, you need a conservation restriction permanently protecting that as conservation land. And a third party, like a land trust, has to hold that conservation restriction. So basically they're watching over the town to make sure the town keeps that as conservation land forever. CPA is a permanent program, it's a restricted fund, and it has to be used to acquire assets that are then permanently protected. If you spend money on a housing unit building that, it has to be permanently affordable. Or if you buy land for housing, permanently affordable to the state standards. If you buy a historic building, which is not all that common, but some communities have, that would need a historic preservation restriction on it, held by a third party like the Historic Society or Mass Historic Commission or something like that. And then the last one we touched on real quickly, we don't have too much more time to talk about it tonight, but we have a whole separate presentation on our website about everything you need to know about bonding. It's a 30-minute webinar that we recorded, it's on our website, but this is very powerful, especially for communities that are first starting at CPA and something real big lands in your lap. Big farm in town is about to be developed and you want to save it. You know, you can bond against your future CPA revenue stream with CPA. The town has now given you a permanent, well, not permanent, at least for the first 5 years, and we've never had it revoked, so it's been permanent in every other community, a 1% revenue stream, and you can bond against that revenue stream in the future. Very powerful. There's about $450 million of outstanding CPA bonds, and well over 100 communities have bonded. And it's usually for big projects, like to buy a piece of open space that you otherwise don't have the money for, to do a big recreational complex, completely rehabilitate a recreational complex from top to bottom, or rehabilitate a historic building that you own from top to bottom. Those are the typical projects that we see bonded very often. So we even had a community like you, another L community, Lennox, that in the same position you're in the first few months of meeting, a huge historic project came up and they bonded, and they were in their first year of CPA. They hadn't even done a CPA budget yet, but the one thing you can do is bond right away. And Lennox bonded to save their historic town library. So it's an interesting story. All right, so the only thing that is left in this, and you tell me if we have time, are just some kind of inspirational examples of how other communities have used CPA. I have rolled through these real quick in less than 5 minutes, but if you want to call it a night, we can do that as well.
I think we have to. We said 10 up was the latest we could go.
And
so
look
we
at
have
that,
a
we got
couple of
1 minute
minutes.
left.
Right.
So, all right. So you're going to get this presentation tomorrow. You can look through these slides, and it kind of gives all the just overview of you know, ways communities have used CPA funds and examples of great projects. So.
All right.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure, and that's
And
what,
let
oh, by the way, that's our technical assistance hotline. If you guys have follow-up questions
Oh, yeah.
as well, and we have 1 minute for questions.
Back in the beginning, you said we need to hold a public meeting, hearing, whatever, yearly, once a year. When did that timeline start for us?
Yeah, great question. It does not say anything about that in the law. It leaves that completely open. So I'd say you guys had your first meeting when? August something or other? I'd
Yeah.
say
First? No.
I would
30th.
say your first year would be
Yeah,
considered.
August 30th was
Yeah.
our first meeting.
So you need to probably have that, you probably should have that meeting before next August 30th. So typically, I mean, a timetable for a community like yours, starting out now, or where you're at, a typical timetable would be you spend the next, 6, 7, 8 months getting your application together, writing your plan, having your public hearing, meeting with the other boards, getting your organization done, getting your application produced. And you do a budget for FY24 at your Springtown meeting. And then next September, you open it up and take your first slate of applications. And you start with that phase 1 eligibility application due September 15th and full applications due October 30th. And then do your first set of projects at town meeting in spring of 2024. You actually are starting at the perfect time. You have pretty much a whole year to get ready and then start accepting your first application. Sometimes it takes 2 years. Watertown took 2 years to set up their program. but it can definitely be done in a year, and then that gives you a nice cycle to go to your first projects in spring of 2024. The last thing I'll say is, between the time of your deadline for applications and the time warrant articles are due at town meeting, leave yourself as much time as you can to vet these projects and to work out all the details and get the wording right in the warrant. It takes a lot longer than you think. So just don't try to vote on your project recommendations on February 1st when the warrant closes on February 10th. Unlike what you're doing right now with the budget, right? Timing. So thank you
Okay,
very much.
Thank you. Thank you for.
I hope that was helpful, and call us with any follow-up questions.
You've been so helpful, like, throughout this
No
whole
problem.
process, like, thank you so much.
Nope, it's a
Honestly,
great
from
program.
all of the residents in Lakeville that voted for CPA, thank you.
I think you're going to really enjoy the program. Try to keep politics at it if you can.
Yes.
It's hard, but try to keep it that way. CPA usually rises above the political fray because of the type of quality of life it is. Hopefully you can have smooth sailing, and we'll be here to help you in any way we can. And tomorrow you'll get an email with this presentation and all the links we talked about.
All right.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thank you
you.
very
I'm
much.
gonna call intermission because we're staying for the Concom meeting, so we'll take an intermission and resume at 7 o'clock.
Okay.